Hello, everyone. We're just going to wait for a few more folks to attend. We've got a pretty good number of people who've signed up for the webinar, so excited to get started here. Just give us a few minutes while we get going. Going to give it one more minute, and then we're going to get rolling here. Okay. All right. Well, again, thank you everyone for your interest. I know some of you may have joined some of our earlier webinars on packaging EPR, source reduction, etc. We're really excited about the session today. First, let me introduce myself. I'm Sebastian DeGrande. I'm the CEO here at PCX Markets. The topic for today, who owns EPR? Really is about getting into the practical nature of addressing EPR compliance, packaging EPR compliance, and some of the pain points and challenges that companies and individuals within companies are facing every day. So really excited to get into this. A couple of kind of process notes here. We've got several speakers who I'll introduce in a moment. I encourage you, as you're listening, to post questions to the Q&A on the chat below. There's a Q&A button. Feel free to post your questions. We are going to reserve a meaningful amount of time at the end to make this, to address those questions and to make it a little bit more interactive in that way. So by all means, you can even start posting questions now. As far as the agenda goes, you can see here on the left, we're going to start with a quick overview of policy context. We are not going to get into the specifics of individual policies in this particular webinar. We have done that in previous ones. There are links that we will provide to even videos of those sessions. And of course, we're happy to answer follow-up questions on that. We will then get into what's required to meet compliance organizationally, and then really start talking about the how and some of the challenges and recommendations and best practices on how to organize to meet compliance on an ongoing basis in a cost-effective and efficient way. And then some of the ways you can leverage tools and other resources to get there. And then finally, this point around building internal buy-in, which in many ways is one of the most important things to consider, which you can call it change management, you can call it leadership sponsorship. How do you get the organization rowing in the same direction together? And we'll talk more about that. And then again, we'll reserve time for Q&A at the end. We are very excited to be running this webinar in partnership with BCG and Qantas. Let me just quickly introduce the speakers you'll be hearing from today. They'll do their own personal introductions. Tim Moen is a partner and managing director at BCG and has tremendous experience in sustainability and climate leadership, both within BCG and outside, advising corporates and running businesses himself. John Willard is a principal with BCG's Qantas organization that focuses on supporting clients in the sustainability world. And then I've introduced myself, and Russell Davis, who's our head of products and services, will be talking a lot about some of the resources that you can leverage and some of the policy issues here. So just quickly, a quick little intro to PCX for those who haven't joined our webinars in the past, just to give you some context on who we are at a very high level. We are a plastic responsibility platform. Our mission to ensure that no plastic enters nature. And we address that mission across three pillars of our offering. One is responsibility intelligence, which is advisory and software tools to help you meet compliance and manage your overall plastic footprint more aggressively and set up internal capabilities around that. The other two, circular plastics and our recovery marketplace, are really ways to drive meaningful direct impact, tangible impact. Circular plastics being access to certified traceable recycled material to substitute for virgin plastic through our network of partners in countries around the world. And then our recovery marketplace where you can help fund, again, verified, transparent collection of plastic waste and recovery of plastic waste so it doesn't enter nature. That's our overall offering space. These things all work in concert, and we work with a lot of companies around the world. And I'll leave it at that for now. Maybe I'll just ask John to do a quick intro on BCG and Qantas, and then we'll get into the content here.
Thank you, Sebastian. Hi, everyone. I'm John Willard. As Sebastian mentioned, I'm a principal at Qantas. Qantas is a specialty business of BCG. We focus on sustainability, helping clients deliver on their environmental strategies and aligning that with their overall business strategy. Together with BCG, we are involved across a wide range of industry and helping shape the conversation in this space, particularly on EPR. It tends to be a very transversal and very transformative topic as of late. And we are partnered with many of the players in the business and helping shape those different conversations. We have a lot of different publications that are out there. And so this is really one of these areas where we bring that scientific expertise, but also that level of business transformation capability and executive engagement, which is so vital to this topic. With that, I'll hand it back over to Russell.
Thanks, Sean. I appreciate it. And we will start getting into the meat of the topic here. So the first thing we're going to talk about is what's happening with EPR and why you need to be planning for it. This is a pretty high-level view here on the screen. We're looking at a global map of country-level EPR focused on packaging. And EPR is not new. It's been around for a while. There's many countries that have implemented some form of it. It takes a lot of different forms. And it's coming across the world. You can see the number of blue countries here that have it partially implemented, like in the US, where it's fragmented and state-based, and other countries where they're currently working on it. It's becoming a bigger and bigger issue. In the past, it hasn't been a huge deal for US-based companies domestically, but that's quickly changing. And I'm going to get into a little bit of what's happening with this fragmentation, especially how it's affecting US companies. So localized EPR is getting more complex and it's fragmented. It's varying goals and different states of implementation. Transcending theme here is the lack of a global treaty. In carbon, we had the Kyoto Protocols, we had the Paris Accord, we have all of these international bilateral agreements, mostly facilitated by the UN, on setting some standards globally. This hasn't happened yet in plastic. There's been a INC process negotiating a treaty. It is shut down for the moment. It hasn't passed one, and they're trying to restart it, but as of now, we don't have a global treaty. And so what's happening is we have many countries with very immature laws, like in the United States, where it's new and it's still fragmented. What this means for companies is you're going to be facing complexity. There's ranging objectives. Like the different states, at least in the US, have different things they're solving for. California has source reduction, other states are trying to collect fees. There's different types of infrastructure that's being funded, different things that are in scope. So the mechanisms vary as well. They're typically fee-based, but there are exceptions to this. And the reporting requirements vary as well. Typically, companies are reporting based on volumes, weights of single-use packaging going to market, but the categories are different. How often you report, when you report, like during the year, this is different in many different jurisdictions. Then also the materials and scope vary as well. So many things for companies to be dealing with on this, and it's becoming a bit of a burning platform. The complexity and implementation, especially in the US, is rapidly accelerating, and there's new data reporting requirements that are coming to companies as well. So the reporting data is coming due. There's 3 states with full programs that are implemented: Colorado, California, Oregon. This is all due May 31st. And I'm going to have a high level view on this page of some of the general EPR requirements. We have, Sebastian mentioned earlier, we have some more EPR 101 classes. This is more like a 201 on how to organize within your company to get it done. So back to the dates. There's 3 states with full reporting. There's more states that have programs coming online later this decade, but they are requiring early reporting as well to inform those programs as they do needs assessments. And there's 10 states with EPR legislation in the pipeline. We don't know exactly how those laws are going to take shape, but it's coming, and the complexity is going to be coming really quickly as well. There's many unanswered questions in these jurisdictions. What's de minimis, meaning like which tiny little pieces of packaging or plastic are excluded. In many cases, it hasn't been clarified yet because the laws are so new. In California, there's a source reduction that companies are having to deal with upcoming requirements this year for submissions that may become legally binding. It's a lot of unanswered questions on this. And then state by state standardization versus nuances. There's still a lot of differences between states, and we hope for some harmonization over time, but it hasn't happened yet. Costs, fines, market access risks. The risk here is, in our experience, relatively underappreciated by companies. There are many things that you need to consider. All of the legislation includes annual payments that ties to volume, which is just an ongoing cost of EPR. This is pretty similar to what's happening in Europe already. Um, but there's also state legislated fines, companies that aren't compliant. And then also within most of this legislation, there's market access issues. If you decide not to comply, but then later it's determined you should have complied, there are back payments and reporting for those previous years. So you could be hit with multiple years of EPR fees all at once, in addition to any fines that may be applicable. And there's a potential to double material costs based on EPR fees. Just looking at some of the tonnage and poundage rates that are being levied in some of these states, it is a material increase in the raw material costs going into your packaging as well. And these new kinds of regulations are going to quickly change packaging. These aggressive source reduction targets in California, recycling and recyclability targets. There's some examples of these types of things already happening in Europe, as we'll get into later. It's not exactly a lift and shift, but you can see some of the changes happening in other markets already as well. The takeaway here, by 2030, US companies could be looking at unique annual reporting with various requirements in 15 plus states, depending on how this legislative pipeline works out. We know we're going to have 7 by then, but it could be double that as well. So, a big deal, something that you need to get figured out in your company and how it's going to work. And with that, I'm going to pass it back over to John, who's going to talk a little bit about organizing for this. Well, actually, one more slide here. This is an example of what we've seen happening within companies that we've been working with. Um, Typically, companies who are just learning about this, very understandably so, are taking like a project-based approach. There's someone who's learning about EPR, collecting the data, consolidating, submitting it for the first time. Maybe it's a baseline report, maybe it's early reporting, but this is turning into annual reporting in every jurisdiction. And you end up with fragmented data. There's not real-time access to this data. Um, you need to have a system in place that requires ongoing continuity. And if you have unclear roles, that can be very challenging. And so the question here, which we're going to help answer today, and I will pass it over to John in just a second, is who's responsible for all this new EPR work? How do you figure that out? And who needs to be doing it at your organization? So with that, John, why don't you take it from here?
Thanks, Russell. The challenge is real indeed. And what we have done here is really begin to lay out all the work that needs to happen in order for companies to pull together a robust, proactive EPR response. Most companies at this point that are preparing for that reporting pipeline should really be on steps 2 and 3 at this point. As mentioned earlier, as part of this series, there's been webinars that have covered a lot of things on step 1. I'm really upskilling on EPR, but really at this point, it's about getting the data in order and then assessing those hotspots. And you really need to pull your team together in order to do that. So as we look at step 2 here, bad data can really be costly in this scenario because not being able to have a good material list by state, by format, it can mean that you are reporting and paying fees on materials that you don't have a good grasp on. Meaning you might be over-reporting and paying fees that you don't have to, or you might be undering and subject to back pay if it's discovered. So really getting strong data that is both forward and backward looking. And by backward meaning you might be reporting a baseline that is a couple years previous to when you have regular data or have the system set up. So being able to extrapolate and build out that baseline is really important. It also requires systems to talk together, right? A lot of this data is coming from multiple different sources, and it may not be set up in a way that is designed to be continuous, always on, repeatable on an annual basis. And so that's a really important challenge to overcome. And there will be opportunities to think about what do you need to build in-house? What do you need to go out and buy off the market? What do you need to outsource in order to help really evaluate your data in the right way and get it into the right formats for these reporting aspects? On step 3, this is another challenging area where it's about understanding where do you have the most exposure. So this is really a function of a couple different dimensions, including the total volume placed in market, the fees that are associated with those volumes and formats, and the regulatory requirements and consistency of those formats across the different reporting states or different entities, where you have to make sure that you are aligning with the requirements and the jurisdiction definitions. All of that is a challenging area. So really going from there into developing how you're going to go about your packaging response in terms of source reduction, transformation of the business, what your compliance strategy will be. All of that creates a lot of complexity, and a lot of different cross-functional areas of the business are included. And ultimately, it really does require that executive buy-in. So you need to build a roadmap of how you will get from where you are today to where you will need to be in the future and by when, and focus on initially on like where you can start to make some quick wins, some quick areas of progress to show momentum. Not everything in this is a systemic change, but by prioritizing where you will need to make those structural and systemic changes is very important early on so that you can lay it out and get that organizational buy-in. So all of this is saying that you really need to form your team on how you need to get there. So how do you build your EPR team and assign the various roles and responsibilities? At the, this is really, when I say a cross-functional, it really is because there's a lot of different aspects to bring into the conversation. We have legal in order to understand the compliance needs, the way the laws are impacting through the business, their interpretation, and in some cases, the position that the company needs to take. Regulatory watch, understanding the uncertainty, what's in, what's out, determining the overall language and where things are impacted. Of course, your packaging teams and your product teams are involved. The finance team will be, if they're not already aware, they'll soon be aware because of where does this need to sit in terms of the P&L. The supply chain, if you have suppliers providing packaging, they will definitely be involved. The sustainability team, oftentimes we see a lot of times this is hung on the hat of the sustainability team, and it's not truly their in their purview to figure this all out and alone. They really maybe they're the central coordinator, and but they alone in isolation can't solve this problem because of its cross-functional nature. And of course, marketing and packaging is very closely tied to marketing. So you need to bring in all of your partners, assign an EPR lead who is going to really lead the charge and really form this cross-functional team, and they have a few immediate tasks to start to sort through. One, where is this? Who pays? These fees are going to be part of the operations going forward. And where do they sit in the overall business function? Does it come out of a sustainability budget? Is it part of shared overhead? Will this be rolled into the cost of goods sold? All of these have different trade-offs based on the structure and how you're setting up. And it will be really important for as you're developing the team in order to figure out what is best for your organization. Then you need to figure out the decision framework. And this is really important because not every decision requires top level execution. That can create bottlenecks within the system. If no one really knows who decides what in these very cross-functional situations, you run into analysis paralysis. There's the lack of accountability in which there is that clear sign off on a proposed solution and move forward. So what we really recommend here is establishing the right thresholds of decisions that need to be made based on the potential impact to revenue, costs, capital expenditures, potential for non-compliance risk. All of those need to have a different tier of decision making, and locking that in early will help streamline the overall activation of the team and progress for carrying through on the EPR response. Next is really deciding the ownership. And one of the best ways to really facilitate this is to start to think about crafting together a RACI matrix. A RACI matrix stands for responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. The responsible person is the person essentially doing the work, or the responsible team. Accountable is the one who's going to be in charge of signing off on it, and consulted is those who are going to be providing key input into the decision, and informed are those who need to be kept in the loop as it impacts them. So start by really setting up the activity of all the different things that need to be done, which business functions and team roles will be responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed for each one. And then you have sort of your matrix of that really drives that accountability and the ability to process a lot of this information through an organization. So in order to activate, start with getting those leads together and figuring out who's going to be carrying this through end to end. Set those decision rights early so that you have a good, clear understanding of the range of impact and at what level of the organization decisions need to be made. And then connect the various functions to their role in a RACI chart, or there's other different versions of this type of framework. This is just one of the ones that's more popular. But whatever works already, it's important to leverage existing infrastructure within your organization to help move these things through. So as you go forward, at the center of this is thinking about the budget and who really will sit with that and own that, because ultimately they're the key, they're the person, they hold the purse strings, they hold the key decisions as they move forward. And then, so what to do next? Well, we really kind of boil it down to three priorities to help get you started. The first is, as I mentioned, building that team. Pull in the various aspects of your, as we mentioned in the previous slide, all the different people who will be impacted, identifying early where you have gaps in terms of your expertise, the types of tools you need. IT is definitely involved in a lot of these different situations because they are really tied into the tools and capabilities, and might need to build things or seek third-party support. And then really figuring out the range of impacts that you expect to experience and setting those thresholds. Getting your data in order is first and foremost, understanding what condition your data currently in is a really important area to help build that initial roadmap. And then building the roadmap itself requires an in-depth analysis of bringing together all the different pieces in one place. So understanding what will our exposure be and by when, what are our measurable goals that we need to aim for, how do we think about our solutions of bringing in PCR as part of it, how do we think about recyclability in terms of the requirements that are out there, and ultimately have a structured roadmap that helps get you there. So once you have your people, once you have your processes in line and the expertise and gaps identified, you can then go out and figure out what are the key capabilities and tools that you need to bring in. More often than not, we have seen companies try to go at this with spreadsheets alone, and it's just too complex. And it's likely that the next wave of EPR is going to require a robust system to get through it. So with that, I'll hand it back over to Russell to walk us through that.
Thanks, Sean. I can't emphasize enough how important it is to get the organization and the decision rights figured out early. Schedule kickoff, get it going, all of those things John was just covering. But in order to move forward, once you have that there, you need some good data. You need to understand um, how this is going to impact you. It's really the backbone of enabling this RACI to do the things that you need to get done to go on this journey. So there's a few key things that you're solving for as you think about your data, how to organize it, how to report on it, how to make business decisions with it, all of that. The first one is you're solving for some kind of standardized data aggregation that's going to transcend your personnel and avoid informal processes. It matters because you need data confidence in both reporting to know you're doing the right thing, not missing something or over reporting, for example, but then also being able to make business decisions about changes you want to make. You need to be confident in that data, and it's a real challenge for some people. The next one is quality allocation of EPR cost. What this really means is understanding how much EPR is costing you and how that gets paid for. Is it one business unit that's particularly driving these costs? Is it a product line that has a certain kind of packaging for a certain reason, or even a specific SKU that's causing the greatest exposure? Um, in order to make changes to address what you understand here, you're going to have business cases that are going to have to go through your supply chain, through budgeting, through marketing on, you know, what's the trade-off here? Is it worth doing this? And without quality data and quality allocation of these costs, it's hard to do that in a confident way. The next thing you're solving for related to data is expertise on optimizing your reporting, minimizing exposure, and planning for these upcoming changes. Like, how is your data mapping to that new bill that's being evaluated in New York State right now, for example? You probably want to have a decent understanding of what might be implicated there. It'll allow you to optimize your reporting and planning. And this does require some dedicated expertise, not part-time project management, which part-time project management could get you through the early reporting for the first state, just to put like a band-aid on it. But over time, this needs to be treated the way that you treat food safety, tax compliance, like all of these other things that are established business processes that everybody has to deal with. And then finally, you're also solving for tracking the varied reporting categories across three now, then five, then 15 plus jurisdictions. It's going to grow in complexity, and you need a system to be able to track these nuances because a LDPE flexible bag that goes on something might be reported differently in the different states. And you need a quick and easy and effective way to be able to understand that. And over time, spreadsheets with changing personnel and changing processes are going to be very difficult to keep up with that complexity. And really, a fit for purpose external expertise, tools, and services is a fit for many companies. Not everybody, not in every situation, but it really helps enable their people processes and ultimately their products to remain compliant and minimize costs and minimize effectiveness under these new EPR requirements. Next, this is just one example. We talked about, 15 plus jurisdictions possibly coming up by 2030. But this is just looking at a short list of materials. We're looking at some PET, HDPE formats, for example. It's for the same packaging, the same format. But in California, in Oregon, just looking at two of the states, everything over here in red is reported differently. If it's green, it's the same. It's a little more straightforward. But you need a way to map this and understand it across one, then two, and then all 10 plus, 15 plus jurisdictions where you'll eventually be reporting this as part of a wider program. And these are some of the things you want to look for. Like maybe you want an external tool, maybe you decide you don't need it. But a purpose-built service will give you many of the things that you're solving for. This is an example of the thing that we do, but there's other options out there as well. You're looking for a single source of truth where you can keep all of your data in one place, be able to pull it on demand. You want it to be always available, not on somebody's SharePoint drive that you have to go request access for and figure out who has it if that employee left the organization, for example. You need to be able to do financial allocation of EPR. You need to be able to have that relatively quickly in a confident way. You're going to want to have SKU level reporting. As that starts to transition across states, you want to be able to understand that exposure at the SKU level, and then also roll that up to the business unit level of where that SKU fits in your product portfolio. You want to have multiple users in here. As John talked about with the RACI and having multiple stakeholders, maybe it is the sustainability person or somebody in packaging engineering who is helping to consolidate the data and make sure it gets consolidated and reported every year. But you want finance to be able to get in there. You want the legal team to be able to get in there and track your compliance. And you want to be able to have compliance and managerial reporting, like right out of here, not a custom request for a pivot table that then gets analyzed in a different way every time coming out of a spreadsheet. You want to have a more robust solution to be able to manage this properly with your business stakeholders and more importantly, your senior leadership when you're thinking about a business case and how you need to change your packaging formats. The way we do it, the way that we've seen most effective is a combination of some of these things that you need. The policy expertise on how to optimize your reporting, what's coming up next, are you obligated? Would you qualify for, an exemption because your revenue or volume is too low in one of the states, or maybe you qualify for one of the low volume reporting options? You want some EPR analysts who have done this a bunch with multiple organizations that can see, these weights look off. Are you sure you didn't make kilograms when it should have been grams? Or there's no tertiary packaging associated with this product line. Are you sure you don't ship it somehow because it's in scope for the law, for example? You want to be able to identify those things with somebody with experience. And then you want to have a scalable platform. All of those features up above, having the single source of truth, the managerial reporting, the allocation of costs, and integrated service delivery for many organizations is a successful way to go after this. And with that, I would love to invite Tim to talk a little bit. Tim's got a ton of experience doing this work on generating buy-in and making it work across the organization, especially at the leadership level. And with that, I'm gonna go off screen here for a
And
minute.
and Tim, just before you get in, I just want to remind everyone we have a number of questions that have been posted already, but please do continue to raise questions in the Q&A because we're almost done with the content here, and we'll flip to that shortly. Thanks, Tim.
Well, in fact, I think I'm hitting cleanup today. So let me be quick so we can get to that discussion. Thanks, Sebastian. Thanks, Russell. Thanks, John. Great information. Really very, very valuable. I think a lot of people are probably surprised that this is happening and happening in so many parts of the United States in somewhat different ways. Let me start by giving you a quick intro of myself. I'm Tim Moen, Partner and Director at BCG. but I've also been in the sustainability field for many decades now, actually more than four. And I've worked in a lot of different capacities in government, nonprofit, and in industry before I joined BCG as a consultant. So I've seen this problem from a lot of different angles. And really, what I wanted to say on this slide is that there are some problems that we have to scale, and my colleagues have been talking about this throughout the webinar, that are really not unique to extended producer responsibility. This really requires a transformation, a management system to work collaboratively across departments. Often sustainability people, they're sort of akin to the conductor of an orchestra. They've got to keep everybody playing together and on time so that the music comes out all right. But they have all that responsibility without necessarily the authority. They don't play the instruments themselves. They're trying to bring people along in that orchestra. And so I think it's really an important message that has been throughout this webinar to work across departments. We can't just hand this off to compliance. The other message is that this may have gotten lost in all of the different, requirements across all the different states, but the stakes here are very, very high. We've done some analysis to show that in some cases, the price per pound of packaging material could double, if not go even higher than that. And after you multiply that out across all the products, that could have a significant impact on companies' businesses. So there's a big problem for a lot of companies that's coming very quickly. And again, I think it has not been recognized too clearly. The other thing is there may be some possible upside. There at least is an opportunity to shape the future where we have innovative packaging designs that could help us avoid some of those costs and come out looking like an environmental hero. And so I think that both those things are in play, but the consistent thing is that we have to take this seriously. We have to work together. And lastly, we need leadership. There has to be tone from the top in the companies that have to deal with these regulations so that all of the departments understand that this is part of their job. BCG, this is one of our specialties, change management. And many changes like this don't go well. In fact, the majority of them fail. And so in order to actually get folks to work on the same issues together collaboratively, we have to have aligned incentives. It's not just tone from the top. It's not just one conductor of the orchestra, but we have to have aligned incentives to make that happen. And again, that's something that BCG does quite often with our clients. So that was the kind of main take-home message, if you will. This is coming fast. It's going to take all of us working together within companies to manage the issue. Now, I think we finally get a chance to have a discussion with everybody online. I know we've been collecting some questions, Sebastian, and it's time to take them.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. I appreciate it. Yeah, we have several questions coming in, and again, keep posting them. We've got a good chunk of time here. We're happy to take as much of it as we need to address these questions. By the way, this recording and material will be available for all the registrants, so don't be concerned about that. You'll be able to have access to this for future reference and for internal use on your end. So without further ado, let me play MC here a little bit on some of the questions that have been coming in. We've talked a lot about organizational models and approaches. I think this is a good question for you, John, potentially, and Tim on the organizational question. What is the best model for corporate ownership? And do you have an example of a best practice that we could refer to?
Yeah, happy to jump in here. So where I've seen really good, strong response is when a company gets ahead of this in terms of like having the right regulatory policy teams sending early signals and then activating leadership early. So it's coming from that top down, we need an EPR response team. And then deciding, does it sit in the regulatory space? Does it sit in our legal team? What is our sustainability team's role in this, and really defining early who is going to carry this forward. And it's important to have at least those three early on in the process because a lot of these programs, they're in a little bit of a regulatory and policy um, formation stage. So there's a lot of questions that are uncertain. And it can't be left on for instance, the IT team who's going to be like, we need to create a report to determine and evaluate those. Second, and it can't be all on the sustainability team because they may not have the operational expertise, the legal expertise in order to help discern what is actually at risk and what is our exposure here. So it really is signaling early to the leadership to assign a clear structure within the team. Okay, we have a task force or a group of individuals who are going to start to own this, and I want regular reports on when this is happening and the updates. And we're going to pull together regular routines and information sharing so that everybody's knowledge is growing at the same pace. Where we've seen kind of mismatches is like when one team has it all figured out, but they haven't shared any of that out with the broader group. So whether it's going to be owned by your sustainability department, your packaging team, or someone else within the organization, it's very clear to have early on that senior level buy-in, that expectation of continuous updating, and then to be able to structure a team that is going to be continually elevating everybody else's knowledge on it.
I'll just add a little bit. I mean, your question is who should lead, and one of the axioms that I've always had in my business life is that accountability should follow authority, and if you don't have authority, you shouldn't be accountable. Um, in this case, the most of the costs are probably going to be with the department that buys the packaging materials. If the packaging materials go up by double, that's going to be a big hit, to the company's P&L. And so, in that case, that whatever that department is called within your company probably ought to be the lead. And then, as John was saying, there's a number of other facets of this, keeping up with the regulations, understanding where they affect you, how they affect you, et cetera, that have to come into play as well. But the basic axiom is if you have more skin in the game, you should have the ownership of the issue.
Yeah. Yeah, and I hate to do this, but I'm going to just make the response even more complicated by adding one more point, which is um, it depends. There is no one size fits all, because in the companies that we've partnered with, there is what I would describe as a maturity and complexity curve, meaning how much have you been dealing with this already? Do you already have people who have expertise and experience doing this in other jurisdictions who can pick it up globally? Do you have the resourcing available internally to take that accountability on in the way you want to in certain functions versus others? There's an assessment of your starting position that matters a lot here. What's your SKU complexity, business unit complexity? Lots of things that factor into it. So it's really hard to say there's one model that's best for everybody. So
Yeah.
let me go to another question here. So this is a good one. One of the things I don't understand, I'm just going to read this verbatim, with a lot of these EPR programs is they may be paying for end-of-life packaging with a recycler in one state, but don't necessarily source recycled material from the same processor, and that doesn't make sense. And it makes it unsustainable. Russell, do you want to discuss this one? I know we have experience with folks. I would focus on two things. One is just to be clear about compliance and response. What you're accountable for in a given state is what you sell into the state. But then there's this issue of the recycled material, and maybe you can address that too.
Yeah, it's a good point, and it's a fair point, I think. In an ideal world, building that circular economy that everybody talks about, ideally it would be, circular on a more local level. But the thing that a lot of these states and other jurisdictions globally are solving for is the complexity and non-recyclability and not being recycled in a specific area. Because the pollution or mismanagement that often happens is at the local level. And so what these regulators are dealing with is trying to incentivize companies in the right way. And we've seen how it's coming out with EPR regulations and raising money based on how much plastic goes into market and other packaging. And the fees charged vary typically based on the type and weight and sometimes component counts of packaging within the local area. Um, it would be ideal for a lot of that material to be sourced locally, but that's you know simply impossible for some of the states, and it's not really how the global and interstate economy in the U.S. works. And so I think the regulators are starting where they are and doing their best to make change in their local jurisdiction.
Yeah, I would say that, there've been some efforts even in Europe, which has some more mature or long in the tooth EPR laws. Even there, they've started to recognize that they can't solve only within a jurisdiction, given the global economy and technical requirements in packaging of different types that require different materials that might only be available to be sourced externally. There's a lot of factors that play into this. There's a question here about whether there is a specific approach that B2B versus B2C packaging takes. B2B meaning industrial, tertiary packaging, et cetera. Russell, maybe you want to take that one too.
Yeah. Again, this one depends a little bit by state and by, other international jurisdiction about whether B2B packaging is in scope and if it's typically reused within the supply chain. From a reporting standpoint, it's not that different. I would certainly advocate that whoever in your organization is managing your EPR program and compliance and the changes that need to be made in the supply chain handle both of them. But other changes you might want to consider are based on marketing and customer perception, because B2C packaging, especially for some verticals like personal care, tend to be very integrated with the marketing and the branding and how customers perceive the product. And so if you make changes, there's risk on sales. With B2B packaging, it's a little more about performance and a little less about, how it looks. And so in some ways, there's more flexibility in making changes with B2B packaging. But again, for simple compliance and organization and how you manage it, overall, many similarities between the two. I don't know if any of the other panelists want to add anything to that.
Here's a good one for maybe John, Tim. What kind of incentives are there for other departments to attract them to work together on EPR topics? Are there some examples of this?
Yeah, this has been one that's been batted around quite a bit in the field of corporate responsibility or environmental social governance, whichever name you want to use. And typically it's the basics that we all understand. Incentives come in the form of a bonus calculation typically, and actually, KPIs or objectives and key results for individuals' performance. And those two can be very related, obviously. And so when I often have put those things in place in the past, again, I look for what uh, what a department or an individual can really do, because I think many of us have had the experience where, you may get a bonus and you're not really sure why. But in this case, it really should be tied to, key levers that that department or individual can manage, and then reviewed on a more senior level on a regular cadence. That tends to work and work very, very well. So it's no magic. It's really just aligned incentives.
Yeah. And I think the more this is tied to existing core KPIs in each of the functions,
Yeah.
the better off you are. So as an example, when you're involving the sourcing or supply chain team, how is it affecting our unit costs for our packaging, and what are the targets you're setting, and how does participating actively in the team around EPR compliance help you meet those targets, or how do you modify those targets in order to acknowledge the cost of doing business in an EPR context, similar with marketing, where I think there's a huge opportunity to talk about how you can tell stories about, the lightweighting of your packaging or the use of alternative materials to your customers that helps build brand equity. So there's a lot of ways to link core KPIs in the business into incentives and metrics for the cross-functional teams engagement here. I agree. Okay, here's another one. This is about California specifically. So California and PPWR requirements for recyclability of packaging don't seem feasible, technology or cost, for many obligated producers. Never heard that one before. Any thoughts on enforcement? This poses significant uncertainty and risk for producers. This is a really prevalent question right now, and a lot of attention being paid to this amongst those who are subject to the California law. I don't know, Russell, do you want to take this to start, and everybody else can join in?
Yeah, yeah, happy to start. So the question is about thoughts on enforcement of how like what'll happen if you can't meet these targets or choose not to meet these targets. Um, I think there's two levels of enforcement that can happen. The first one is through the PRO. So, you're working through a PRO under PPWR, and then in California, you're working under CAA. Typically, there is an agreement between the supplier and the PRO, and then the PRO has contractual rights to impose penalties on the producers, which is tricky because typically the laws require the producers to work under a PRO, and so producers are kind of stuck at that point. So that's one place where I think you'll see enforcement come faster because it is within the PRO, you're reporting, you're paying fees to them every year. Very easy to enforce penalties on producers in that case. The second level of enforcement I see is from the states themselves or from the jurisdictions if we're also talking outside the US. And typically there are fines outlined, market access points, things like that, if you're like not meeting the requirements. Um, it's new in the US, at least, so we haven't seen how enforcement is happening there. But I expect the states to be standing up processes to send letters of noncompliance. You'll have a period to address that letter, and then a period to remediate the change, and then the penalties will start. It's to be determined how aggressive the state legislative bodies are going to be on this and how they're going to deal with the number of producers that are under the plans. But I would assume that the penalties are real and they will catch up with producers if they're continually not compliant, either in reporting or in hitting targets that vary in different jurisdictions. I don't know if folks have anything to add to that as well.
Nope, hearing none. Let me go to one other, and maybe this is open.
Actually, I thought of one other thing as well.
All right.
There is this unique thing because California was in the question. And California, under their source reduction requirements, which is an additional part of the law, unique to California and relatively unique globally, they have specifically talked about malice fees tied to source reduction. So one of the hardest things for many of these producers is to hit this 25% reduction by 2032, especially since there's not an allowance for growth. And CAA has, publicly stated like they intend to have malice fees to make it expensive for producers to be incentivized to do it. So I would certainly expect something like that to come along and probably be tied to your annual fee schedule that's going to be coming out in each of these states.
Yeah, good ad. Okay, we have time for probably maybe two more. There's one here that is linked, and I actually think anybody can address this one, BCG or you, Russell. How can we leverage if we're operating already and have experience dealing with European EPR? How can we leverage that experience in California and other US jurisdictions?
This is a question we get a lot at BCG because many of our clients are multinationals. And the way we've addressed it, well, not just with EPR regulations, but with other types of regulation as well, is what we call the common core. Essentially, finding the elements that are in common between the various jurisdictions and then adding on where needed, because of course there are differences. But what you will find is that most of the things that you're going to do in one source reduction EPR reg are going to be similar in another. So that's the common core. We define that out. We create the incentives for companies to work, for departments and companies to work together. And then we have, the local jurisdictions adding on what is needed for compliance. But that has been a very successful method for, multinational companies.
Great. Okay, I got one more here is a little bit of a tee up for us here, Russell, which is how do you make a decision about whether and how to leverage external tools or support?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think this applies to both the data that you need to collect and manage on a tactical level, and also like how you're going to get set up. Um, Uh, I would start by, tactically getting together a relatively lean team to start setting up some of those, racy frameworks and figuring out how you're going to collaborate across the various departments. I think we hit that point home today about how important that really is. And using that lean group in the beginning to figure out, where you're at in data, where you're at in expertise, and if you have gaps, you start to engage somebody who can help you out, either in the short term, and getting organized maybe, or in the long term, building a sustainable data program that'll help you link your data to the compliance actions that you have to take.
Yeah,
Anything on that?
I'd also just add on that again, there's external and internal factors to consider. How many different EPR jurisdictions are you going to be subject to where each of the requirements is unique and different, and can you manage that level of complexity at scale? Internally, what is the amount of resource and commitment that that resource can make to driving this program and becoming expert and maintaining knowledge of the evolving EPR landscape, the data landscape, et cetera, on an ongoing basis? Do you have that capacity internally to build that infrastructure yourselves, right? Or is it more effective to leverage and partner with external providers who can provide that expertise at scale in a cost-effective way, right? And that's sort of the business case decision that you need to make for yourself.
Mhm. Yeah, and I can give one confidential but client example. Um, we've been working with this company who all of their EPR, like learn it all, join all the data together. It's all put on one person's plate, but they're part-time in this effort. Like they have 10 other things that already constitute a full-time job. And so they've wanted to work with us since, we can take a lot of that expertise and a lot of that burden away because there's a time cliff on many of these reports that need to be submitted. And if you don't have that expertise and you can't stand it up fast enough, a lot of times, at least for what we've seen, an external party can make sense, and that's also a factor in whether or not it makes sense for you.
Great. We are right near time. I don't know, Tim, John, Russell, if you guys wanted to make any final comments or points before we sign off.
No, I thought it was very informative, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you all for helping deliver this, and then thanks to everyone who took the time to attend. As mentioned, we will be reaching back out with a link to the recording for the webinar and access to some of the resources. Feel free to reach out to us directly. You see all the QR codes here below if you have any follow-up questions or want to talk more. Thanks for the time, and everybody have a great day. Bye.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Thank you.